Hello, how are you? I hope you are all really well. I have been so slack with making videos so far this year, and we're already in April somehow, but it's just been such a hot summer and booktube feels like a winter activity, like it should be a cozy thing to do. When it's like 40 degrees, the vibes just feel off. You know what I mean? Also, it doesn't help that I can't have my aircon on if I'm filming because it's too noisy. So you don't really want to watch me being a sweaty mess on camera, to be fair. It's still really warm. It's still going to be 32 degrees today in April. Climate change is happening and it's scary. So anyway, I thought I would catch you up on the 5 books that I've read so far this year. Let me just bring them up on Goodreads so I remember what I've actually read. So the first book I've read was The Fraud by Zadie Smith. I have such a love-hate relationship with Zadie Smith in that I thought White Teeth was so incredible when I read it, like probably 10 years ago at this point, but I have not really enjoyed any of her other books that I've read. I don't think I've even finished a lot of the ones that I've started, but I was kind of excited for this one because it is a Victorian set novel. Let me refresh myself on the details of the actual story. So it's about a woman called Eliza Touche. She is a housekeeper to her cousin by marriage, William Ainsworth, who was a real author from the Victorian era and was hugely popular in his time. He is a little bit older than Charles Dickens, so he was kind of popular before Charles Dickens then kind of took over Victorian literature and became the biggest thing ever. So the book kind of jumps around back and forth in the timelines, so you get basically the full picture of this woman's life and William Ainsworth's life from when he was this sort of young, attractive, famous author to when he's kind of this old, grumpy guy who doesn't understand why he's not as popular as he used to be and resentful towards people like Charles Dickens, who he was kind of like a friend and a mentor to. At the same time, or in the later part of the timeline, I guess, there is also a trial happening, which was a real trial called the Tichborne trial. It was hugely popular at the time. There was this guy who claimed that he was this man, Sir Roger Tichborne, who had gone missing and like presumed had drowned when he was like traveling on a ship. But this man has arrived in England from Australia, claiming that he is this Sir Roger, and so they have to have a trial to prove whether he is or not because there's a whole inheritance thing related to that. And alongside him is a man called Andrew Bogle, who's originally from Jamaica but sort of ended up working for this family and being really dependent on them, and so he is the one sort of eyewitness who would be able to recognize whether this was the real Sir Roger, and he claims that it is. And Mrs. Touche kind of gets this weird obsession with this Mr. Bogle character. And there's a whole section of the book where you find out about Andrew Bogle's backstory in Jamaica as well. So I did enjoy a lot of this book and a lot of the aspects of it. I love the time period. I think Zadie Smith conjures it up really well. She's obviously someone who loves literature from that era, and she sort of evokes a book that might be written at the time but also isn't like fully going into a Victorian style of writing. And she's obviously able to write about these topics in a way that couldn't be written about at the time, like talking about what it was like to be this housekeeper or, you know, a black man from Jamaica in Victorian England. You can definitely see that she's done so much research and she's very adept at clearly putting that research into a narrative form. However, I did feel like the book was way too long, and I feel like this often happens with books that do require that kind of heavy amount of research, because I feel like the author is so excited about what they've discovered that they just want to put everything in the book, and I definitely felt like a lot could be cut. I felt like some of it was quite repetitive. The relationship between Mrs. Touche and William Ainsworth is quite obvious, really. Like, it's a pretty simple relationship and there's a lot of text devoted to talking about them in a way that doesn't really develop the characters, I didn't think, especially because you're going back and forth so much. So you already see the end result of these characters right at the beginning anyway. I'm definitely really glad I read it. I think I've said it before that I do miss reading historical fiction, but I find it really hard to find adult historical fiction that I really enjoy. So I did really enjoy it for that. And I love the ability that modern authors have to go back and tell stories from the past in a new way and reveal parts of history that haven't been talked about before either. But it also definitely felt like a bit of a slog to get through as well, which you never want when reading a novel. The next book I read was Jillian by Halle Butler. I randomly picked this up from the library because Carly Thorne, everyone's favorite booktuber who's not a booktuber anymore, but she still does talk about books on her Instagram. She said she'd read it and loved it. and I wanted to read Halle Butler for a while, though I wanted to read her other book, but my library doesn't have that one. So I picked this one up, and the premise really intrigued me because it's about a 24-year-old woman, Megan, I suppose it's American, you'd pronounce it Megan, who is working in a sort of office job, and she's sort of weirdly fascinated with her co-worker Jillian, who is 35. And I love office set things because I've worked in an office for the last almost 10 years. I find them such fascinating places, the people you meet in offices and get to know in such an intimate way because you have to work with them in such close proximity every day. You just wouldn't get that kind of intimacy with such a variety of people anywhere else, I don't think, outside of a workplace, but I feel like an office specifically is such an interesting environment. But anyway, this book really bummed me out. It was a really depressing book to read. I hated both of these characters with a passion, and I think that was the point, but it doesn't make it any more enjoyable. I thought Megan was just the most selfish, awful kind of person, and so arrogant without any reason. She didn't seem to have any real interests or passions in life at all. She was just annoyed and angry at everyone else. And then Jillian is the sort of exact opposite, where she is overly positive and chirpy about everything and just kind of believes everything will be exactly how she wants it, because she lacks any kind of self-awareness or any ability to just be a rational human being. And they both just get themselves in awful situations because of their personalities. And I just found it so frustrating. And yeah, didn't enjoy it at all. So it hasn't really made me want to read the book of Halle Butler's that I originally did want to read. I don't know, maybe I'll give it a go. I then read Heartburn by Nora Ephron. This is one of the 3 books I bought when I was in London. They all happen to be the VMC novels as well, like these Virago modern classics, and they're all American as well, which is kind of funny. But in Australia, it's really easy to get a hold of British novels for the most part. It's actually American classics or more indie American novels that are actually harder to get hold of. So that's one of the reasons why I picked up the 3 books that I did, and this is the first one I've read. Nora Ephron is obviously most famous for being a film director and writer for films like When Harry Met Sally, Sleepless in Seattle, You've Got Mail, and I have watched a lot of her movies. They're definitely not my favorites. I don't think I'm as enamored by her filmography as a lot of people are, but they're certainly enjoyable. And I was very intrigued by the premise of this one. It is sort of not even loosely based on her real life. It basically is her real life, where the main character, Rachel, is pregnant with her second child when she discovers that her husband has been having an affair and wants to be with this other woman. This was such an easy book to read. The writing style is so personable and funny and very engaging, and you get fully immersed in this sort of upper middle class New York world of, I think it's like the 70s maybe. It was published in 1983, so early 80s. The character of Rachel is a cookbook writer, and so in the book the premise is like she is just writing this book herself as like a memoir, I guess, and she sort of adds in recipes and things amongst it because she says that's what her audience is expecting from her. I think some of the commentary in here is probably a little old-fashioned at this point. There's definitely racist things in here as well, which just seems like it's inevitable from books written in the 20th century. But there is still a lot that's very prevalent about relationships between men and women and the different ways that men and women behave in those relationships. I think at first the story felt a little bit random, like a lot of really random things happen, but the more it went into, the more I really enjoyed it, and just one of those books that really immerses you in its world totally. And it's so short. It's just this like little burst of insight into this woman's life and her world. And yeah, it's kind of a shame that Nora Ephron didn't really write any other novels. I mean, she wrote essays, but I always prefer a novel. I then read another book that I bought, Strong Female Character. I didn't buy this in London. I bought this online. This is written by Fern Brady, who is a stand-up comedian, a Scottish stand-up comedian who was on Taskmaster a couple of seasons ago, and she's so funny on that show. And she talks very openly about being diagnosed autistic. This is just kind of a memoir of her life up till now, mainly about her childhood and being a young adult growing up in Scotland. Definitely very little about her career as a stand-up in this book. I have read a fair few sort of memoirs and other things about people who are autistic, and a lot of those books I find a lot to relate in. Late Bloomer by Clem Bastow was one I especially related to, but what I almost loved about this book is that I didn't relate to Fern and her life much at all, which is so great because people view autism in such a particular way, in a very stereotyped and cliche way. And the more autism representation we get in books and films and TV, the more people will be able to see the diversity of what it actually means to be autistic. Some of the stuff that happens to Fern is so overwhelming and just terrifying, like reading it all in this book. Her parents literally sent her to an institution for mentally unwell people, all because there's such a lack of understanding of the reason why she was behaving the way she did, which was because of being autistic and being overwhelmed all the time and not having her needs met in the right way. And so many things that happened to her just arose from misunderstandings between how her brain views the world compared to the way that most people view it. One thing she did when she was at university, because it made her money, was be a stripper at a variety of strip clubs around Edinburgh. One of the things that she talks about is that she never felt any shame around doing that job, because autistic people generally don't tend to adhere to the kind of moral sense that society generally has around things like that, because there is no logic to that kind of morality. I really enjoyed this book. It definitely isn't a funny book, I don't think. I mean, it could be read as funny, but to me it just felt like Fern was being incredibly honest about everything. Some of it, as I said, it really is confronting. She suffers from a lot of meltdowns, but for her, they come out incredibly violent, and she ends up often like breaking furniture and punching things. And it really has taken her until very recently to work out what triggers those things and find ways to sort of mitigate them happening. I found it a really fascinating read and just loved how honest she was about everything, because I can only imagine for anyone who is going through similar things, it would just be so reassuring to be able to read about someone else going through those as well. And then the last book I read was Good Material by Dolly Alderton. I'm actually going to see Dolly Alderton live. She is coming on a tour of Australia, doing some kind of talk thing that authors do. A couple of my friends also really love Dolly Alderton, so they got us tickets. It's not happening till November, but it's exciting to be able to actually see like a real famous author, because they don't tend to come to Perth, I can tell you that. So I read Ghosts before and I loved that. And I also watched the TV show Everything I Know About Love, which is based on her, I don't know if it's a memoir or a series of essays. I haven't read that book though. So I was really excited to read Good Material, but I have to say I was a bit disappointed. The book is definitely very different from what you would expect coming after Ghosts. It is about a man. He's a 35-year-old man in London. He's a stand-up comedian, and his girlfriend of 4 years has just broken up with him. And most of the book is about him wallowing in misery about this breakup, believing that Jen was the one and not knowing how to deal with being alone, basically, especially at an age where all of his friends are married with children. Being in your 30s, I mean, I'm only just 30, but being in your 30s while everyone around you is in solid relationships and is set to have children is something very relatable to me. And so possibly the book was hitting a bit too close to home, and it being a very realistic thing that I could be, aside from not having gone through the breakup, be in that same situation in 5 years' time. But I think I really struggled to really care about this character, because it wasn't even that I found him annoying, it's that I found him quite dull as a person. And you do get to hear Jen's side of the story in the end, but I also felt like that was a little bit cliche too. I just felt like the whole book wasn't quite original enough. It kind of dabbled in cliches a little bit too much, and the characters never really stood out to me as real people. They felt more like just representations of types of people. I can see why this was a really interesting experiment. Someone who is so well known for being the champion of single women in their 30s, or just talking about relationships and love in general. I mean, Dolly Alderton has a relationships advice column as well that she's really well known for. So to sort of flip it on its head and go, well, let's actually look at the male perspective, and not from the perspective of sympathy almost, but let's look at this character who could be considered the really annoying male in a different type of story. But I didn't think the experiment quite worked, or at least I didn't feel like the experiment was quite worth a whole novel, because I didn't really enjoy the reading experience for most of it. There are definitely parts where I thought it was really well done and interesting, but just a very mid-range book. It was fine. So that's a bit of a shame to end on that note. So anyway, I'm currently reading Poor Things by Alasdair Gray. Obviously, hugely successful movie by Yorgos Lanthimos with Emma Stone playing the lead character. But interestingly enough, she is not really the lead character of the novel. The novel is from the point of view of a medical student, Archie McCandless, played by Rami Youssef in the film. I'm actually quite enjoying the book. I really like the way it's written. Very much invokes Gothic early 1900s and is also set in Scotland, and also being the sort of Frankenstein thing of talking about medical breakthroughs at the time. So the book is just sort of a bit of a fantasy on that, of what could actually happen if you could reanimate a corpse kind of thing. What I'm finding really interesting is that all the things that I thought were a bit clumsily done in the movie in terms of the sort of feminist aspect, I think actually much better done in the book. Even though the book is not from Bella's perspective, you still so perfectly get her point of view. You completely understand all of those themes of these men are just using this woman, and suddenly she starts making her own choices and they don't like her anymore. The infantilization of women as well, like all of those themes are so perfectly clear in this book. I felt like when people were talking about the movie, they were saying they'd like elevated the themes, but I don't think that they did. And sometimes things just work better in books than in movies. And so far, I think that this book is much better than its film counterpart. However, I am only about 100 pages in, so I will reserve judgment until the very end. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you have read any of these books, let me know your thoughts on them, and I will see you next time. Bye!